Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. For this workshop, we're going to be doing and talking about rainwater harvesting and home-scale water cycle restoration. My name is Michelle Diaz. I'm the Education Program Manager at Trees Atlanta. And Trees Atlanta mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forest by planting, conserving, and educating. We have education programs year-round, and I'll encourage you to visit our website to learn more about what's coming up. Our speaker today is Brandy Hall. I'm very excited to have her joining us for this first workshop, and she's the founder and managing director of Shades of Green Permaculture. This is a series of workshops, and I'll invite you to take a look at the other classes that are coming up, the Permaculture in Action and the Let Your Forest Be Your Food. During this class, you're gonna have the opportunity to ask questions and provide and send us any comments through the chat, but also you can use the Q&A tool to submit a question. At the end of the presentation, Brandy will be answering questions live. After this event, you're going to be receiving a survey email. Please send us any feedback and how can we improve these classes and your experience, and how can we provide more content virtually. Again, I'll invite you to subscribe to our newsletter, visit our website calendar, and follow us on social media. Well, welcome, Brandy. Thank you for joining us for this first workshop today. And you can go ahead. It's all yours.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandy Hall, as Michelle mentioned, and I'm the founder and managing director of Shades of Green Permaculture. I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation here. Get it started. Oops. Actually, let me make sure I optimized. Yep. Okay. And actually, I'm going to turn off my video for the presentation for streaming to maximize the bandwidth here because it starts to get sluggish. So here we go. So welcome. This is a workshop on rainwater harvesting and home-scale water restoration. I'm going to talk a lot about what that means and what you're able to do to make a positive impact in your garden. Things that will help to address some of the regional and global challenges that we face, specifically around how we manage water. So I'm going to show you some common water management practices that undermine sustainability and what you're going to be able to do to change your landscape into an eco-paradise. So I want to take just a couple of minutes to introduce myself if we haven't met before. I function as the managing director and founder of Shades of Green Permaculture, and we're based here in Atlanta. We're a regenerative design, installation, and education company. I come from a long line of builders and growers. I earned my general contractor's license when I was 21, and I've studied as a stonemason, I've farmed, I've run nonprofits, and I consider myself a lifelong student. I'm really passionate specifically about leading a purpose-driven business as a force for good, and also about being a mama to this feisty little 4-year-old on the left there. That's Zephyr Dove. And this is my husband on the right. That's Aaron. He's one of the kindest and just most supportive people on the planet. That's us at our sweet little homestead in Pine Lake, where I also serve on city council. So that's a little bit about me. And then our small company, we're now a staff of 16. We've worked on over 1,000 projects over the past 10 years. And then one other thing I want to convey is that no garden is too small to make an impact. In fact, we've figured out that the impact adds up really quickly. So in 2019, we started tallying up the impact from working with clients, And we work on roughly 100 to 150 projects a year for design and installation. And these range from tiny yards to really large farms and developments. And when we started adding up the cumulative impact that our clients are having, in just 1 year, we realized that it's really big. So here's what happened. Over 500 acres were transitioned to organic management. 150,000 native and medicinal plants were planted. 4,500 trees were planted. 40,000 food-producing plants were planted. And 11.5 million gallons of water replenished our groundwater and aquifers. And that's going to be the focus specifically of this workshop, is how do we replenish our groundwater and aquifers? What did that look like? So after working with so many people on very many types of projects, I've really come to know something is true for myself, that it's possible to have a life-giving and reciprocal relationship with the land that supports us, even if we're in an urban or suburban context, by creating gorgeous spaces that build health rather than undermine it. We have the tools to address the climate crisis in our own yards because small solutions equal big impact. So your garden, no matter the size, can have a positive impact. So for this presentation, we're going to focus on a fraction of the solutions that can help address climate change, specifically the ones that relate to residential scale water management, which is the first pillar of a regenerative landscape. So manage water as a resource to rehydrate soils, reduce irrigation, and restore the water cycle. Which begs the question, in order to understand the solution, we first need to explore the challenge. How is water conventionally managed? Frankly, it's not. This is an all too familiar scene, one that's becoming more and more frequent. So then what happens to all of the rain? We get nearly 70 inches in some years in Atlanta, and on average about 50 inches. So building conventions approach water as a nuisance. That's the primary lens that we approach water in building. And the primary objective then is to get the water away. So then water goes into the stormwater system as runoff from impervious surfaces. And then combine that with removing trees, which is really typical to development, and directing water runoff to streams instead of the soil leads to something known as the heat island effect, which leads to desertification over time. So more heat equals less rain. What about water usage? According to NASA, between 50 and 75% of residential water consumption in the US is for watering lawns. And 2/3 more water is used to irrigate lawns than all cropland combined in the United States, according to the EPA. And this is just for outdoor use. So then this begs the question, how do we restore a broken water cycle? So I want to show you a quick video here.
Healthy Water Cycle, Healthy Gardens by Shades of Green Permaculture. In the city, it's easy to underestimate the volume of rain that comes from the sky. For example, a 1-inch rainfall on 1,000 square feet produces 600 gallons of water and 27,000 gallons of water on 1 acre. This ends up being an enormous amount of water. 2.3 billion gallons in a 1-inch rain in the city of Atlanta. 80% of this water lands on hardscapes, roofs, parking lots, and roads, and flows across the surface of the ground through the sewers and stormwater infrastructure, to rivers, and ultimately to the sea. This phenomena causes flash flooding because all of the water flows above ground toward rivers, swelling and overflowing their banks, and drought because water that runs off too quickly doesn't replenish moisture in the soil. In a forest, rain forms a mist as it's broken up by plant leaves as it falls from the sky. The mist falls slowly, and 80% of the water sinks into the soft, leaf litter-covered ground. Forest soils store massive amounts of water, making it available to trees throughout the year. A healthy alternative. Rain gardens concentrate water from your downspouts into basins in your yard, which allows infiltration into the ground. This reduces runoff, flash flooding, drought, and city water costs. Create an ecology. A hydrated soil is a healthy soil. Healthy soil grows healthy plants. Healthy plants create healthy yards and gardens, which help create healthy ecosystems. Pollinators, butterflies, beetles, songbirds, and bees. Fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes, cut flowers, perennial vegetables, culinary and medicinal herbs. Create an ecology that nature thrives in for your family and your friends. Use that water. Now that's landscaping that's smarter. For more information, visit us at shadesofgreenpermaculture.com.
Great. So now that we've talked about some of the issues around how water is conventionally approached in a landscape, the bulk of this presentation, I really want to focus on some alternatives. And this is a mantra that we come to adopt when we're working with water. Slow it, sink it, spread it. And this was said by Brad Lancaster, who wrote Rainwater Harvesting for the Drylands and Beyond. So let's talk for the rest of this presentation about how we go about slowing the water, sinking the water, and spreading the water. We do this by working smarter, not harder, which is an adage that I love. I'm sure you're all familiar with. So we can reduce the need to irrigate by choosing the appropriate plants. And choosing plants that are really well adapted to your garden's conditions sets them up to thrive without the need of costly irrigation. Also, we can direct stormwater strategically through the yard in order to hydrate soils. Building the soil's capacity to hold and store water helps to mitigate the effects of drought. And infiltrating water keeps forests and ecosystems intact. It recharges aquifers and it regulates the extremes of drought and flood. So when water is managed as a resource, the landscape as a whole can withstand drought and flood and is more resilient. We reduce irrigation by planting at the appropriate time of year, by planting smaller plants so that they can establish without as many inputs, by maintaining a ground cover to retain soil moisture, by watering deeply and infrequently to encourage deeper roots, and also by using rainwater preferentially and then directing the overflow to where it's useful and can infiltrate during heavy rains. So the title of this workshop, as you know, is Rainwater Harvesting and Managing Water as a Resource, or what is actually the title? Rainwater Harvesting and Water Cycle Restoration on a Home Scale. So we're going to be talking about both ways to infiltrate it, and then I'll also talk about rainwater harvesting systems and how those function as part of a larger water management strategy. So it starts with spreading and sinking water with earthworks. And what is an earthwork? An earthwork moves, sculpts, and grades the land for the purpose of directing water flow. And typically, they're trying to accomplish one of three things. The first strategy with earthworks is to slow water down and allow it to infiltrate into the soil. The second strategy is to move water from one area to another. And the third strategy with earthworks is to retain water, as in ponds. And for this workshop, we're going to focus on the first two strategies, slowing it down, allowing it to infiltrate, and moving it from one place to another. So these two strategies can be achieved with three primary earthwork techniques that function by gravity in order to infiltrate or direct water through the landscape. So the technique one is contour swales, and I'm going to talk in depth about each one of these, but to lay them out first. So the first technique is contoured swales. The second technique is diversion swales. And the third technique we're going to focus on are rain gardens. So first, let's discuss contour swales. A contour swale is constructed of a basin and a berm along a contour line, like this that you see here in the photo. So the green, this was right after this was constructed and then seeded with Austrian winter pea on the berm. So that band of green is Austrian winter pea. You can see it's not a straight line. It kind of has some curve into it. It's following the contour there, which is the line that's perpendicular to the slope. And what that does is it allows it to slow and infiltrate into the slope rather than continuing to channelize and run down the hill. So contour swales can be plumbed with piping between the swales like this. This is a plumbed one. So you can see in the top contour swale, it's got an atrium grate that goes into, in this diagram, a 3-inch PVC pipe, and then that one goes to the next one. Or they can have a slight spillway made of rubbled stones, more like this, which allows it to level spread from the berm and continue on down the slope. So the size and width are determined by how much water feeds into the swale, and how it works within the space. So you may use small but more frequent swales if you're really trying to spread water more evenly through a site, or you might use a large, deep swale if you have limited space and a lot of water to manage. So when do you use a contour swale? When would this be useful? You can use a contour swale to slow water running down a slope and allow it to sink into the ground. Or in areas where you've identified a dry slope that's not forested, so as not to get into the tree roots. And also higher on the watershed as a means to slow water before it becomes an issue downhill. So when you're working with less water generally when you're working higher on the watershed. And then when you're at sort of the bottom of the bowl or the bottom of the watershed, you have a lot more water to manage and you're more limited by topography. So it's a great strategy for being able to slow water down higher on the watershed without having to have as much of a heavy-handed approach by the time it gets to the bottom of the hill. So next I want to talk about diversion swales. So what is a diversion swale? A diversion swale is a swale that diverts water from one area to another. It's also sometimes called a conveyance swale. So it doesn't follow contour like a contour swale, but depending on what it's trying to accomplish, it can be sited anywhere from 1% off contour or 1 foot of drop over 100 feet to exactly parallel to the slope heading straight down the hill. And there are ways to build them to manage water accordingly, depending on how they're sited. So some examples of diversion swales are bioswales, which you might have heard that term before, and dry creek beds. So I want to talk a little bit about those two types of diversion swales. So what's a bioswale? Here's an example. Bioswales are typically vegetated, which is how they get their name, and they convey water in a diversion swale that's between 1% and 5% off contour. So they're used to move water slowly while infiltrating before depositing it at the outlet. And this also allows for more filtration through the plants. And they can be applied where you're trying to move stormwater runoff from a paved surface like a street or driveway, or in this instance, a parking lot, to another area in your yard, but you want to clean the water of vehicle or road residue before it enters another earthwork, like a pond, for example. If you're moving water to another type of vegetated earthwork, like a rain garden, this would be redundant, but it's helpful if water quality is an issue. So next, what's a dry creek bed? Dry creek beds are other types of diversion swales that are typically lined with stone, and they simulate a creek or riverbed and they create a basin that moves water from point A to point B. So we're probably all really familiar with dry creek beds. They're used quite a bit. So essentially what this is doing, like in this photo, this driveway receives a lot of water and it heads down the hill here. So this particular dry creek bed, it functions as a path, but then the base of it has infiltration pits, which are basically, you know, a foot wide and maybe 2 foot deep and 2 feet long, that are filled with gravel that allow, they're like underground speed humps. So that's one way to think about them, for the water that's going to be otherwise going straight down the hill. So it's a means for both moving the water where you're going to be able to use it. In this particular site, it goes into a pipe at the bottom of the dry creek bed, and then that goes into a rain garden. And it also stabilizes the slope, so you're not causing a lot of erosion and loss of topsoil. So when is a good time to use a diversion swale? The first application is if too much water is the issue that you're trying to solve. So diversion swales reduce the amount of water in an area because you're moving the water from one place to another. The second application is if you have erosion along a slope and you want to stabilize the soil while moving the water elsewhere, like in the photo that I showed. And third, if you want to direct the water to another part of your yard. When you're clear about how different swales function, you can begin to move water throughout the landscape according to its behavior and what exactly it is that you're trying to accomplish. So I find that working with water is really simple, but it's often counterintuitive. So the most important thing that you can do in working with water is spending lots of time observing water patterns in your yard. And then you can get creative with how you dance the water around your land. And next I want to talk about rain gardens. So what's a rain garden? A rain garden is a basin with a berm, generally irregular in shape, and it's designed to infiltrate water into the soil. So rain gardens are a water system element specifically designed to receive the water and then allow it to slowly percolate into the soil. They're filled with, generally the way we construct them, they're filled with a base of gravel or busted concrete because we're often taking up a lot of impervious surface. And then they have engineered soil, which is a mix of topsoil and sand. And then they have what's known as the ponding depth. This specific diagram just shows them with mulch and ponding depth alone, which is another kind of less expensive way to construct them. And they hold water during heavy rain events, but unlike a pond, the water then sinks into the surrounding soil. So depending on the soil type and the soil saturation levels, you know, if it's been raining for a long time or not, they typically drain completely within 12 hours after a rain event. And next, I want to talk about rainwater harvesting systems. So a rainwater harvesting system is a system of collecting and storing rainwater for later use. And it can be achieved with rain barrels, above ground cisterns, or in-ground tanks, and can be either distributed with gravity or with pumps. So pictured here are two types of rainwater harvesting systems. One on the left is for foot washing, dog watering, and mud kitchen play. And one on the right is for irrigation when needed. So the 75-gallon barrel, which is the one on the left, is gravity distributed. So it's got the spigot at the base of it, and we don't need it for, this is actually at my house, we don't need it for irrigating vegetables or anything like that. And then the one on the right, the 300-gallon cistern, is distributed via a yard hydrant with a submersible pump. So it has a pump inside of that, and then we have yard hydrants, and then we can do larger irrigation as needed for those. So when is a rainwater harvesting system useful? A rainwater harvesting system is useful if you have regular uses for non-potable water, such as irrigation, play, or washing. And then there's a lot of nuance in how you size rainwater harvesting systems, which we're not going to go too deep into, but really the amount of water needs to be the amount that you would need to capture and store to get you through whatever amount of drought you might anticipate during the growing season for the size area that you're wanting to irrigate. So how do these all fit together? This is a typical landscape, permaculture landscape that we install. So we usually begin by tapping downspouts. We call it tapping downspouts. They go into a leaf eater, which is at the top of the screen. There you can see this little diagram. And leaf eaters have 2 levels of filtration. So it's got a debris screen, and then it's got a mosquito larva screen that keeps the water out of the pipes and out of the tank. So we begin by tapping the downspouts, and then we route those to an above ground rainwater cistern. And then from there, the overflow is directed to the rain gardens, so via underground pipes. And as each rain garden fills, they overflow one to the next and the next and the next and so on. And the rain gardens then drain into the surrounding soils, which makes the water available to plants exactly where they need it. So I wanted to share a study that Brad Lancaster, who I referenced before, he talks about this in one of his books, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond, Volume 2. And in 1992, the US Army Corps of Engineers proposed spending $500 million to increase the capacity of the LA River. And all other agencies were separately looking to update their infrastructure in a really disjointed and uncoordinated program totaling $20 billion. And with the rate of development, they proposed that this would be a solution that would last 20 years or less. So a very temporary solution. And then this organization formed a group of citizens called Tree People. And they proposed something else. They built a trial landscape that could capture, clean, and store all the rainwater that fell on a property in a 100-year flood event. And they led a demonstration for public officials where they unleashed 4,000 gallons of water into the landscape in less than 10 minutes, which simulated a 100-year rain event. And they found that there would be the same impact to manage a 100-year flood event without expanding the LA River if 20 to 40% of the watershed's 8,000 homes implemented the techniques, which would be just a fraction of the cost. And so from that project, they implemented something called the Sun Valley Watershed Project, which is a branch of the LA County Department of Watershed. And they've approached renovating neighborhoods through green infrastructure based on this demonstration. So it goes to show that things that we do in our yard have a really huge effect. 20% of 8,000 homes, that's not very many compared to $20 billion that they were proposing spending. So I want to talk a little bit about what this looks like in a real life example. So here's an example of how the 3 pillars of a regenerative landscape, water being one of them, and then soil and plant communities being the other 2, how they work together in a real life example. Here on the screen, there's a planting plan, which is the colorful one on the left, and a water detail for a standard residential site here in Atlanta that we did a couple of years back. So I'm going to talk about the water aspects specifically. So beforehand, the soils were really poor quality. This is a post-construction site. And then the water was just generally being poorly managed, which was causing flooding and erosion. And then the primary plants were ornamentals or grass. So I mentioned the plants because grass, turf specifically managed under 3 inches can have an 85 to 90% runoff coefficient is what it's called. So 85 to 90% of the water that hits turf actually runs off as stormwater and doesn't infiltrate into the soil. So you can see here from the photos, the way this was constructed, there's a big shared driveway, which is the photo on the right. I'm standing on the shared driveway. And then the low spot actually was at this client's house. You can't really tell from the photo, but those driveways, going toward the end of that far right photo, is going uphill. And so the low spot is right off of the back of the client's house, which you can see in the center photo, and then in the left photo, the driveway there. And essentially what had happened is they had the builder, this is a builder grade landscape, so this was just after the CO was given. They did a lot of cut and fill, so they took the grade down so that they could have these driveway back entrances. And then what was happening is the low spot basically was just capturing all the runoff from the back of these houses and the driveways and the turf, and then flooding into the client's basement, which you can see in that center photo, or in the garage rather, which you can see in that center photo where there's a lot of mud. And then simultaneously with that, the center photo there that shows the PVC line with a T coupling right at the top of that brick retaining wall, and then that attaches to the downspout. That was meant to be an air vent for a very undersized flow well, which is essentially just the big gravel pit that was supposed to receive all of the rainwater from the roof. But as we've encountered in lots of projects where this has been implemented, they're grossly undersized for the amount of rain events that we get. And so what was happening, and the size of rain events, so what was happening is it was backing up and coming out of that air vent and then undercutting the back of the retaining wall, and then washing all of that clay also into the driveway. So when we got involved, one of our things that we wanted to do was bypass that entire system. And then I'll show a video here in just a second about just a site walk talking about the water system so you can see it in real time. But here are a couple of photos after we did our work. So this is all 4 of the techniques that we've discussed working together. We've got contour swales, diversion swales, rain gardens, and rainwater harvesting, which I'll show more in depth in the video here in just a second. So these can all work together so that you can mix and match earthworks to move water strategically through your landscape, and also slow it and sink it and spread it. So what we did here, we tapped downspouts, and then we gravity fed them into a cistern, which then overflowed to the front yard in a series of rain gardens. So the top center and the far left photos are the rain gardens in the front yard. And we did that so that we could get the water from the low spot and send it into the front yard where it would be useful, and then have it overflow into the stormwater that way, instead of directing everything to the low spot and then not having no recourse to manage it once it's down there. And then the next thing that we did, we placed rainwater fed hydrants, irrigation hydrants throughout the yard. Those are fed by the cisterns, which are shown on the right-hand side there. And then we diverted water from the driveway using a bioswale. And then we turned that on contour so that it could sink into the slope before it got down into the driveway. So slowing the water along the slope created an opportunity to grow lots of native plants and hydrate the soils. And then we also engineered a low spot along the driveway to give the overland water that would otherwise have nowhere to go somewhere to infiltrate. So that's what that bottom center photo is. So pictured, we've got the rain garden planted with St. John's wort. We've got a rain-fed irrigation hydrant, the above ground rainwater cisterns, and the rain garden that infiltrates the excess water from the shared driveways and also the yards. So to further illustrate how these work together, I'm going to show you a quick video of a site walk explaining the water system of this site more in detail. Oops. There we go. Try again.
So here we have a large amount of driveway space, as you can see. Kind of a shared driveway. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 driveways in total, plus 1 connector here up ahead. So what we did, a lot of what's going on originally with this water here at this house, right around where the car is parked, right where I'm pointing, that is pretty much the low spot for all 4 of these properties. So because of the way they did the grading, they all have back entrance driveways, which means they cut the grade down by several feet. in order to level it out for parking. And so what that created is an artificial low spot where all of these houses and all of these driveways are draining. And so it was mostly collecting right around here at this client's house. And so one of the first things that we did is we dug out a rain garden where those plants are planted. Now it's winter time, obviously, so usually it's fully covered with vegetation in the growing season, but everything here is deciduous or perennial. But we dug this down about 4 feet and basically created an artificial low spot. So everything from this property and this one will be able to drain into this space. So this is essentially a rain garden. It is a rain garden, and it's fed by overland water from the driveway. And rather than pooling and causing the grass to die and then backing up into the garage there, where you can see there's like old staining on the concrete there, rather than that, it's giving it, now the water has a place to go and sink into the soil. And then this is planted with Rosa rugosa. You can see the remnants of these really awesome rose hips that are rich in vitamin C. So that's what these shrubs are. They grow really, really well here in Atlanta. And then we also have some river oats and a couple of other perennial herbaceous plants planted in here. So the next thing that we did is we created a diversion swale along this hillside here. And the diversion swale, it takes the water that's cresting off of the driveway here and directs it into the hillside, which is keeping it from going down into the low spot. So we wanted to give it a chance to drain off and then run along the hillside. And then at some point, about where my finger is right here, at some point it turns and becomes a contour swale. So you can see, looking at the slope right there, it runs perpendicular to the slope or parallel with the toe of the slope here. So it goes diversion, diversion, diversion. It's a really gentle diversion. It's about 1%. And so it's allowing also that water to infiltrate, and then it turns on contour so that the rest of it can infiltrate and catch what's coming down the hill as well. And then this is planted really heavily with lots of lobelia and river oats and mountain mint and all kinds of things that are in the swale themselves that are all deciduous and have been cut back. And then also with chocolate mint, which I've mentioned a couple times. And this is a like partially deciduous, partially evergreen mint. That does a really nice job of ground cover. You can see it's nice and low. It's interspersed with this here, which is mountain mint. Really amazing native plant, great for bumblebees. Yeah, so that's what we did here. We took that water and we ran it into the hillside. So the next thing we did, and this is where I'm really excited to show you, is we took all of the downspouts on this side of the house. There's that one in the corner, there's this one, and then there's this one. You can see the leaf eater up at the top there that would focus. Yeah, there it is. So what we did, and you can see they're set pretty high. Like here's the driveway level. The leaf eater is set about 8 feet, 9 feet in the air. There, and we did that so that we could achieve the 2-foot drop from where the leaf eater pipe meets the PVC right there. It's 2 feet higher. The line goes down. It's buried. It's going up the hill. So there's probably a 3 or 4 foot grade change to about where those tanks are set. And then all of these lines merge together. There's the other one. That one, oh, the leaf eater is right behind the plant. You can't really see it right there. But so those merge together and then they feed into the tank right there. So, and then the last one up at the top corner comes down and feeds into the tank as well. And this is a 500-gallon cistern. So then what happens is the water fills into the cistern and then it overflows via this pipe right there. And then that actually goes uphill. So you can see I'm standing at the base of the hill. From where I'm standing, that's the, that's the finished floor level. So you can see it meets up with grade in the front of the house, and that's probably 6 feet above, 6 feet from grade here. So there's about a 6-foot elevation change from around where these tanks are to the front. But we were able to achieve gravity feeding even up the hill because where the overflow pipe is set on this tank is 2 feet higher than more than 2 feet higher actually, than where the overflow pipe daylights at the rain garden in the front yard. So I'm going to show you that part now. One last thing about the tanks here, because these downspouts are an inverted siphon system, they're going to hold water during the winter, as I talked about in the module. So we because this right here is the low spot in that piping system, we put a winter drain on this pipe here so it can drain all the downspouts. The water would naturally backflow down to this low point, and then that ties into an underground flow well that was around here, which was part of the original building scope, I guess. So when we came onto the site, most of the downspouts were routed into a flow well, which is basically an underground gravel pit, but it didn't have any sort of overflow. So it was backing up because it was way undersized, and then it was shooting out. There used to be like a little coupling there, and it was shooting out actually from the downspout and then undercutting the back of this retaining wall, and then also flooding the whole part of the driveway there. So it was kind of a mess. So we just bypassed that system, but then ran the winter drain into the existing feed line so it had somewhere to go. So that's what that is. So here I am now. You can see a better view of the leaf eater, how much higher it is than the tank there. So those pipes go in, and then that's the overflow from the tank, and it comes up. We trenched it right here along the fence, and it goes into first rain garden, which is here, and this is planted again with Rosa rugosa, which is gorgeous bright pink flowers. Grows all the way to the northeast. It's more aggressive in the northeast. Here it's not very aggressive at all, so that's something to consider. But it's planted with Rosa rugosa and then also St. John's wort. So that's what all of this is the medicinal St. John's wort, which makes a really beautiful evergreen ground cover, as you can see right here. It looks kind of like a Dr. Seuss plant to me. And then we've got some native flame azaleas around the back of the plantings here. And then this rain garden, we did, this was before we started using engineered soil. This is the mulch and basin method, which is in the construction diagram. So this one's about 1.5 feet deep because we really wanted to accommodate, there's so much of the roof water here. It's a pretty decent sized roof, and it's half of it. I believe it's around 1,200 square feet of roof. You can see that's coming into this system. So this one's about 1.5 feet deep. And then that overflows. There's a pipe that goes under the sidewalk there and into another basin over there that's planted with some river grasses and lobelia. This is another thing. These are all planted with perennials, so they don't really have much going on in the winter, but since we did this project years and years ago, we started doing a lot more evergreen things in the rain gardens just for some more seasonal interest. But then this rain garden is the same style as that one over there. You can't really see it because the light, but that one pipes over, goes to this rain garden. There's just really wonderful soil that's being built in here, some really great plants, and then that overflows out eventually to the road. Also one other thing, all of the irrigation we put in is an establishment irrigation. This is called micro irrigation. It's just got like above ground emitters. It's the most water efficient one of the most water efficient if you do it at the right time. We've since switched to using drip irrigation because it's buried under the mulch. And even though it emits more water, there's less water that evaporates. So, but this whole irrigation system is just for establishment, and then in times of drought. This landscape doesn't need irrigation at this point, but we haven't taken it out. But then it's all fed by a pump that's in the cistern where we were looking before, down the hill. And then all of these hydrants, these are the frost-free hydrants. There are a few of them in the landscape. You might have seen them earlier. And these just are able to hook up to the irrigation and be pump fed, or, you know, be able to be used for, you know, watering container plants or what other uses you might have for the rainwater.
Oh, let me go back to playing here. Great. So I want to end with one of my favorite quotes, which is, to change something, build a model that makes the old model obsolete. Build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And that was Buckminster Fuller. And so municipalities around the country are faced with growing pressure to manage increasing amounts of stormwater due to both expansive development and impervious surface, as well as just the increasing intensity of storms. And these problems really can't be solved with engineered solutions alone. That's essentially just sending the problem downstream. And what we know is that in order to address these issues and the issues of climate change through the lens of sustainability, it really takes a new model that begins to treat water and soil and life as the invaluable and irreplaceable resources that they are. So I hope I've given you a glimpse into what's possible and how we can contribute to the solutions through our gardens, because remembering no garden is too small to make an impact. And I want to just thank you all so much for your time and attention today. If you'd like to learn more specifically about the 3 pillars of a regenerative landscape that I mentioned, you can go to shadesofgreenpermaculture.com. And there's a bar at the top of every page to sign up for a free webinar there. And then we're also launching our online course, relaunching it, the Regenerative Backyard Blueprint. It goes live again this spring. And registration for that opens on March 15th. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can visit shadesofgreenpermaculture.com/RBB. And I am going to, now that I'm finished with my presentation, start my video back up. And I think that this is a great time to take questions. Maybe I can stop sharing.
Well, thank
Am I here?
you. Thank you, Brandy. I learned a lot of things. Thank you. Great information.
Great.
Let's see, there's a few questions here.
Wonderful.
So one person, he said he might have missed this, but wondering if I can use my rain barrel water on the edible plants in my garden, potatoes, beans, onion, greens, etc. I've read to only use rain barrel water on non-edibles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. There's a lot of information out that is very conflicting. You can find information that says, yes, use it, no, don't use it. The primary issue is on newer asphalt roofs can have heavy metals in them. So that's what that's referencing when you read not to use rain barrels. But there's also studies that say that after 3 years, most of that, what would otherwise have come off in the early stages through rain, is no longer an issue. Most pumps that you use have sedimentation filters also for like all of the grit on asphalt shingles. So if you were using a pump situation, that wouldn't be an issue. For rain barrels specifically, most of the sediment will settle to the bottom of your rain barrel. So if your roof is older than 3 years and your spigot is raised up, not at the very bottom of your rain barrel, and then the sediment can kind of settle down, then it shouldn't be an issue to use it on your vegetables. Yeah, great question. And one that we get a lot. I see here. Should I read them or Is it?
Sure, the Q&A, yeah.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
So can you talk about the different plants that you use in rain gardens and what makes them beneficial? That's a great question too. So we use lots of different plants, though the kind of primary lens that we use in selecting plants is edible and medicinal uses, and then also native. So that's kind of like our top threshold of plants that we select. And if we're choosing plants that are non-native, we first ask the question, is there a native that could fill the same niche that we're trying to achieve? And if not, then we ask, is it an aggressive plant? Is it something that we need to worry about? Is there like a legacy strategy for managing it? All of these questions. So specifically in rain gardens, we switched to using more evergreens, as I mentioned in the video there. And that video is from our, it's one of our site visits as part of the online course, which is why I was referencing modules and things. But we started using more evergreens. Some of the native evergreens that we use a lot in rain gardens, we use several types of evergreen native ferns. And then we also use dog hobble is one that we've found works really well. And then St. John's wort, which I showed in the photo, which is not native, that particular St. John's wort, but not aggressive, but is medicinal. So kind of going back to the decision-making chart around what to choose. And then Rosa rugosa, which you saw, that's another one that we use quite a bit for its medicinal rose hips. And it's just absolutely beautiful come summertime when it's blooming, and is a very low maintenance rose. It's not susceptible to fungus and kind of all of the things that you associate with growing roses. The way I like to use the hips for those is right before they start to shrivel. After they've gone to hips, you can preserve them in a jar of honey, like cut them in half and then put them at the base of honey and submerge them in honey, and then use it in your tea in the winter, which is a great way to get a little extra dose of tart, sweet vitamin C. We also use lobelia quite a bit, which is a native hummingbird nectary. It's got a gorgeous, like tubular, it's got a gorgeous red flower that the hummingbirds love. And we also use river grasses, Chasmanthium latifolium, which is river oats. That's one that we put in rain gardens quite a bit. And then for trees and shrubs, things that you can grow that are edible or native, you can grow mulberry, hazelnuts, pawpaw, elderberry, beautyberry, oak leaf hydrangeas around the outsides of rain gardens. And then generally plants will benefit from being near rain gardens. So they may not function within rain gardens, but they can do really well near rain gardens where they're getting a lot of soil in their root zones. Other plants we use are muhly grass. It really depends on if it's full sun or full shade. But yeah, muhly grass is another really beautiful, like full season, 4-season interest rain garden plant that you see used quite a bit. Great question. And Thomasina is asking, are we hiring? We actually just went through a big round of hiring. So we're not currently, but we are always accepting applications. So you can find that on our website. If you go to shadesofgreenpermaculture.com/careers, you can find where to submit a where to submit your resume and cover letter. And then Thomasina also had a question, is there a typical cost for the work y'all do, or does it vary too much from project to project? It does vary quite a bit. The range of landscaping, just kind of across the industry, one way to think about landscaping costs, if you're doing a complete overhaul and it also has a significant amount of hardscaping, one estimate is around 10% of the total value of the home to do a complete landscape overhaul. Another way to think about it, because not very often are people doing an entire yard overhaul, would be a range depending on what it is, whether you're doing plantings or hardscape. Hardscape is obviously the more expensive, labor and material intensive component of landscaping. So that would include retaining walls, driveways, patios, paths, things like that. But the range, another range to estimate, is between $4 and $12 a square foot. So there's a wide range. And then Leah asks, is installing the large cistern a do-it-yourself project, or does that require more than your average do-it-yourself knowledge? That's a great question. I think that there is a lot of nuance to installing larger cisterns, specifically if you're using an inverted siphon system, which is what I referenced in the video there, which is taking the rainwater and then running it uphill using gravity. It works similar to if you've ever used a water level, like a clear tube, and you fill the clear tube with water and then you drop one side, the water will come out of the low side, and that is called an inverted siphon. So we use that same principle when we're siting rainwater cisterns to be able to take water that would otherwise just be going downhill and move it uphill, which in that particular site was really useful because the low spot was, we didn't want to have the low spot of that particular site receiving all of the landscape's water from the roof and from the driveway and from the neighbors and all of those things, because it didn't have anywhere to go at that point. And so we used that inverted siphon system to be able to feed the water into the front yard, which was uphill. So when you're doing something like that, I think it takes a little bit more nuanced knowledge about how to site it, but otherwise it's pretty, it's pretty straightforward. There's definitely some things to know about how to run pipes together and friction and things like that. So I mentioned the regenerative backyard blueprint. That video is from one of the modules on water. So we do a whole module on water that talks more about the nuance of rainwater harvesting systems. So if you're interested in learning more, that could be a great way if you're wanting to do it yourself, and it's significantly less to do it that way than to hire somebody to do it. But definitely you can look into that. And then Jacob asks, have you ever harvested the rainwater back into the house? Yes, we have. It requires a bunch of filtration depending on what you're trying to do with it. We did a project in Noonan a few years ago where we put in about 6,000 gallons of rainwater catchment from their roof, which was, I think, probably 2,000 square feet roof. And then the overflow goes into a food forest orchard with contoured swales down the hill, but then the bulk use of the water is not for irrigation, but is for indoor non-potable use. So we did enough filtration on it to be able to do laundry and hand washing and flushing toilets. And that's definitely something you could do, would require, it requires working with a plumber, especially if you're retrofitting. It's more straightforward if it's a new construction. But if you're retrofitting your plumbing to be able to receive rainwater, then that's something to consider, is hiring a plumber for that, but it's definitely doable. And then Thomasina also asks, what do you consider a challenging project? Oh, that's a good question. We do a lot of large scale off-grid water systems, and I really love those. So we did a project maybe, I think we started it in 2015 up in Hayesville, North Carolina, and it's a commercial farm and community center. And we did an off-grid water system where we tapped a spring on the property. We found a spring that's in the mountains, and tapped that and then ran it into a tank where it was able to, we used something called a hydraulic lifter pump, which is really similar to a ram pump. And it basically functions on the pressure of water falling. So there was 70 feet of drop from where we tapped the spring to where the pump was placed, and it was able to lift, just through gravity pressure, lift the water into 6,000 gallons of storage tanks high on the property that then gravity fed spring water to the entire site for both potable and non-potable use. And then that whole system backed up to rainwater harvesting on both of the buildings if the spring ever went dry, and then that system backed up to the well. So that was a really challenging project that was really fun to think about, and had, I think, like over a mile's worth of piping between all of the different lines that we had to run. So, we're working in kind of like steep terrain in some of it, and running pipes like relay style up the mountain, so as not to have to bring the machine up there. that was really fun and really challenging, and just a lot of like, it was like doing a giant puzzle. Yeah, so those kinds of projects I find particularly challenging. Also ones that have a lot of design constraints, I think are really challenging. Like, you know, if there's like specific uses that the client has that really inform what's needed, and the topography is really limiting, or, you know, especially working with water, it can be really challenging. You know, if we encounter a lot of houses, I'm sure many of you probably have the situation where the house is kind of in the bowl of the landscape and it's receiving a lot of neighbors' water. That can be a real challenge with working with water, because you're really limited in working with water on the topography. And so you have to get really creative. And then you throw in things like trees and hardscape and, you know, all kinds of other things that add constraints to it. Can be really a big puzzle to figure out, but those are the things that we love to do. So, any other questions? All right.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Brandy. And to everybody, thank you for joining us, and check out our website for the upcoming workshop that she will be leading in the next month.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Bye, everyone.